Hello, Metatopia 2021. I am Avonelle Wing with Metatopia, and I am here with guests. I have Kelsey Danger, I have Bebo, and I have Joseph Seering. And we are going to talk about the care and feeding of your community manager. Why don't we start with Kelsey? Tell us who you are and how this affects your life.
Yeah, hello. I am Kelsey Danger. I am the community manager of Gen Con, that gigantic beast from the mid-Atlantic. And my pronouns are they, them. Uh, Community management is my everyday, and learning how you can best communicate and work with community managers to maximize really the benefit that they have for you is something I think about and work with every day.
Excellent. Bebo?
Hi, I'm Bebo. I am the head of brand over at playroll.com, and I have spent about a decade in the tabletop games industry working in marketing management, Kickstarter management, community management, anything that you could possibly imagine that involved community related tabletop stuff. I've probably done it.
Excellent. And Joseph?
Hi, I'm Joseph. I am a researcher studying moderation and community management, and I'm based at Stanford right now, and I've been studying this stuff for about 6 years now, so I'm, I guess, newer than the other folks here, but just as enthusiastic.
6 years is nothing to shake a stick at. I think you're still good.
I mean, there was one period of time where it was like 1 year of time, but it felt like 10.
That first year, man. All right, so in the pre-conversation, Kelsey actually said something that I thought was really important and kind of the core of why I thought this conversation was important. Oh, cat on screen.
Bonus cat.
Which is that you spend a lot of time explaining to people what a community manager does and what your job actually is. So what does a community manager do?
Right. So this is going to be different for each company. I find that a lot of companies kind of mash community management and social media managers together, especially if they're a smaller company. This is something you see more often. If it's a larger company that can afford to have a separate person who's just managing community, what it looks like is kind of like multiple fingers into every stream. So my everyday job at Gen Con involves keeping an eye on our public perception to make sure that if there's anything that needs to be involved, that we need to step in on, or something that we can capitalize on if it's something good, that I am there to make sure that happens. It is making kind of more brand advocates for us. A big part of my job is reaching out to people who have not been associated with Gen Con before, or maybe don't really know what it's about, or have a negative perception of it, and trying to say, like, hey, this is who we are, this is what I'm doing, and I'm interested in having you involved. A big part of it for me personally is moving more into our diverse community spaces, since Gen Con especially is a 50-year-old ancient beast that has a lot of history that we can help change and make better by involving more diverse and inclusive communities. And the chunk of my other work involves community-focused programming, to put out programming to engage and connect our community together, whether it be online or in person, depending on what kind of year it is. So I find that community managers tend to be kind of like the barometer of where your company is, of where your fans are, and how you can respond to both of those things by this point person, which is your community manager.
Bebo, does that, in your experience when you've done community management, can you talk a little bit about what the other things that the job entailed, if there were differences?
Definitely. So I've found that in my experience, there have been two different types of community manager jobs, and I've had dramatically different experiences in both of them. The first one is the one that you mentioned about, kind of mixing together social media manager and community manager into one role. And the other is a community manager role that involves it really being a team effort and coordinating everybody in the company, managing the community as a whole. That is what I definitely prefer. It's a lot more focused and a lot less overhead. And I would love to see the industry move in a direction where they understand that your community manager and your social media manager really shouldn't be the same job because those are two separate jobs and they are full-time jobs.
Preach.
Yeah. The other piece of that, though, is that I think one of the reasons that people get really confused about that is that community managers can live on social media in order to be effective at their job and use social media platforms to be effective at their jobs. That does not mean they should be your social media manager, even though those are the tools we use. And I think that gaming, because it is kind of a young industry and has a lot to learn, don't understand that just because those are the tools we use, that's not our job.
That is extremely correct. I try to explain it like this. You have your like Twitter or social media accounts for your company, and those are supposed to represent your brand, right? But your community manager, when they're on social media, are representing the person. They are the people element of your company. They're there to be a direct connection, whereas the brand is just supposed to be like the brand, like the KFC Twitters of the world. You know what I mean?
So Joseph is a colleague and has said some powerful things about the way that the conversation went when he started asking people about community management and moderation. Joseph, can you talk a little bit about just how that conversation has unfurled and some of the things that you've learned?
Sure. So I've studied Facebook groups, subreddits, Twitch channels, and Discord servers. I think that mostly covers it. And most of my work now is on Twitch and Discord. And I guess when I first started to study it, I came from a school of computer science, and I kind of expected to be talking about tools, to be hearing from people about, these are the tools I use. This is how they work. This is where they don't work. This is what I want you to build for me. And that was not at all how the interviews went. The interviews were much more about the social, the interpersonal elements of the work, and I've sort of begun to focus more in depth on those over the years since that, and I've really come to appreciate the value of the many different hats that community managers and moderators wear, and the kind of the social depth of those roles. Yeah, I could ramble forever, but I'll just say I get contacted occasionally by people starting new game companies because I work in the game space a lot. Asking what they should be doing about moderation, and they expect me to say like machine learning or some crazy technical thing to apply it to their game, and I say, wait, hold on. There's like a lot of steps between where you are and machine learning, if that ever ends up being useful, and it probably won't. So even as somebody coming from, again, a computer science background, I have to often say there's a whole lot of things you have to do first before we bring in the tools.
So part of the reason this conversation matters so much to me is that I'm on a crusade right now to talk about the invisible labor and the people who get underestimated in how they influence the engagement of audiences. And I feel like community managers are in that list where people are like, oh yeah, they like organize events and they like field complaints. But no, the community managers determine the tenor of the dynamic with your community if they are able to respond graciously and gracefully, even when you as an organization have done something dumb. They will pull your butts out of the fire. I would love to hear from Bebo and then Kelsey. Do you have an example of a time when an organization that you were supporting had your back in a powerful way that was useful to you as a community manager? And if the answer is no, that's a really powerful statement in itself. So we're gonna go. Is that silence from both of you?
Oh, I thankfully I do have some examples. I guess the advantage I have is that Gen Con is a very small company. We're a company of 15 people. And because of that, when I believe strongly in something, I can literally just like kick down David Hoppy's door and be like, David Hoppy, I think we should do this thing. And that has happened more than once. More than once, something has come up in the community, and I've been like, we need to do something about this right now, and we need to respond in XYZ way. And if I very strongly believe in it and I can justify why these things are important, my company very, very much has my back. But this is the advantage of having a smaller company. If you have a community manager with a larger company, a larger corporate company, getting that level of control and ability to really give community managers the power that they need to control the conversation and the reaction is nigh impossible from my experiences with larger companies, which is, I imagine, Bebo, probably what you've experienced in your side of things.
No.
Oh no.
I actually do have an example, which I did not think about until just recently. There was a moment in which there was a new game that came out. I think it was a Deepwater game. It was like Welcome to or something, and I was working on the project, and somebody had started a little hate crusade in the comments of the campaign to tell everybody that I was a monster. And the company basically just screenshot it and was like, "Lol, we are on Bebo's side."
Nice.
And it was like very minor and very funny, and they did it in a way that was like, just throwing this out here, this is the vibe we're going for. And it made it so that like their response was so flippant that those sorts of claims were just kind of dismissed as a whole, and everybody just kind of laughed at the situation and moved on.
Good.
Which isn't normally how I would handle it, but I felt like it was appropriate at the time.
Right. They took the teeth out of it by just being like, forget this.
Mhm.
And I think that's an important piece of the care and feeding of your community manager, is that if they're going to have your back and they're going to be out there taking flack for any decision you've made, then you have to have their back when people come after them, right? And it's going to happen because the internet is full of terrible things. And yeah, go ahead.
And we need to make sure that people understand that a community manager job is a really emotionally and mentally taxing job. It's a high cognitive load. And if your community manager is dealing with a heavy stress load and you do not take care of them, they cannot take care of you or your company, because they are not going to be on their full game. And they're interacting with the public. Like, you have to protect your community manager. You have to make sure they're healthy and they have enough to eat and they're getting enough sleep. Or you're going to have a grumpy community manager, which is bad.
Yeah, that is. I think the best example I have of that is when we had to schedule Gen Con over Yom Kippur, that brought a lot of feedback that was validly upset, and I was the front line in taking all of that feedback. And while all that feedback was valid and important, it's also a lot of emotional labor, both collating that feedback, collecting it, and making sure it went to the right person, to make sure that our community's voices were heard to the correct people. And I am the kind of human being where I care deeply about my job, and I think most community managers do. And we are the way that we are because we care about our community. So when they're upset, it's like I get upset with them, and you end up kind of taking some of that emotional burden. So a lot of it is making sure that there have been definitely times where I've taken like half days and I've been like, I'm done, goodbye, and my whole team's gone like, yeah, please just go, like take some time off.
I think that what's really powerful about that, though, is your team saying it to you, and like the people around you proactively being supportive of you taking time off. That's a really important factor, because as a community manager, it's really hard to not be on 24/7. And sometimes you need to be given the permission to relax. Otherwise, you're not going to. And
Yep.
so, no matter what company you work for, if you have a community manager, like, please be mindful that like your community manager needs some time every week to like emotionally recover from the high cognitive load that you're putting them through, having to engage with a public facing job every single day.
So one of the things that came up, I think that's a really valid and valuable point. And I also think that there is a component of also teaching your community to have your back. And that's actually one of the conversations that I witnessed recently that is why I pulled Joseph into this conversation, is about how communities have banded around around Twitch moderators to help create tools for dealing with hate raids. And I think that there's some really valuable stuff in the way that those communities are responding, because they looked at the shit that their community managers were dealing with and went, wait, we can make this easier. We can make this better for you. We can reduce your cognitive load. Joseph, do you mind talking a little bit about that for a moment?
Yeah, sure. So there's a whole lot to be said about hate raids, and of course how horrific they've been for a lot of people. And I am doing some research on that, and I have to it's we're not done yet, so this is still in progress work. So take what I say with a grain of salt. But one of the most inspiring outcomes of that work, or the most inspiring pieces that I've seen, is how communities have come together to support each other, to build tools, of course, but also to teach people how to use existing things to protect themselves, but even just to support each other, to join each other's chats and flood positivity as a response, and to have each other's backs on Twitter, to reach out to each other and offer support for somebody who's going through something really terrible. So the response to all of that has been really in large part driven by kind of just regular people who had some time to offer, or had a particular skill to offer, and saw a way to make things better for people.
So if I were adding something to my little wish list of things that I wish organizations were good at, I think that making sure that that they expressed gratitude in such a way that they modeled it for the community, so that the community jumped in and said, hey, I see that you're taking all this heat for this institutional decision, and I see you, and I appreciate that you're doing all this labor. Thank you. And also, I have my best manners on because the organization has made it clear that they have your back. Are there other things that either you, Bebo, or Kelsey, have on a wish list of things that you would like tuck into people's psyches to keep in mind?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Stage and have a code of conduct for your community up front. Like, as somebody's going into Discord, much like you do in your Discord, Abby, have them agree that they are not going to bully or harass people or participate in any type of unwanted attention or contact with other people. Like, making sure that everybody knows when they walk into a room, hey, I know that the guy is dressed like a clown, and I know that there's a table full of pies in front of you, but you're not allowed to pie the clown in the face. That's not what we're here for. No, you need to make that clear, because as a parent of a 11-year-old kid, like, all of these kids walk into my house and they assume they can do whatever they want unless I tell them that there's rules. And adult humans are no different than children. They still have to be told what to do.
Or what not to do.
Yeah, exactly.
I think for me, a key understanding of the responsibilities of a social media manager versus a community manager, and what both of those people are good at and not good at. Because I think maximizing both of those individuals is vital to the success of both as well. And to echo what Bebo said too, communities are made in the image of whoever runs them, whether it be your community manager or your CEO or your company board or whatever. And it's quite obvious that if you have someone who is unintentionally putting things out into the world, whether it be for their own personal social media account, or like a weird joke in a newsletter email, or even the companies that they're like implicitly supporting, those things are reflected directly back into your community, and you will see them twicefold. One of the jokes that I say, like, this is a real true story of a thing that occurred, and I use it as an example all the time. And back when I was running LARPs for a living, we were really pushing making sure you didn't touch people without consent. And so I was on stage opening ceremonies, like there's like 300 people in front of me, and I'm just like, oh, and don't even give someone a high five. Like instead, just say a verbal high five, and you can scream like a bird, and that's a verbal high five. Like, haha, funny joke, funny joke. Except for the next three years, 3 Christian years, I get to hear people screaming like a bird every time they want to say hello to me or just to each other. And this is a thing I did not think about or consider. But the community went, our leader is saying this thing, we should do the thing. And I went, oh no. So like those are the kinds of things you have to be conscious of, like when you say and you do stuff, because it will get mirrored even when you don't intend it to. Like the toddler metaphor is like on point that Bebo said. It's the same thing. If you scream like a bird at your community, they will scream back at you. So you have to be careful.
And they'll be even birdier than you were.
They will. It's awful. Oh, there was so much screaming.
I find that particularly funny because the icebreaker at Living Games 2016 that I was involved in was Funeral for a Crow, where you cannot you can't use words, and so you yell at each other as birds. And so the community picked up this thing where if somebody engaged in a microaggression, they cawed like a crow. And so every time someone acted up, there was this burst of crow, and shockingly, there were very few repeat offenders that event because they were just mortified by having everybody turn and caw at them.
I love it.
So pluses and minuses, right? And we absolutely, that was an emergent behavior that we had not prepared for. And the first time it happened, I'm like, what emergency is happening?
Nope. You're just your whole game screaming like birds. That's
Yep.
life now.
That's life now. So
I wanna,
Joseph, yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to jump in to kind of reinforce something that Kelsey said about communities being created or shaped in the image of their creators. You said it better, but I think I did some work looking back at the history of online communities, going back to the late 70s, and that is a true thing for all of the history of the internet. And I found examples over and over and over of spaces that failed or had huge problems because their founders, their creators, were people who had sort of lived their lives with everybody treating them great, and they expected the communities that they created would behave just like that, with everybody treating everybody else just fine. And so those communities tended to have problems when, in fact, not everybody acted that way. But I saw a lot of examples of communities created by people with experience with being harassed or being marginalized, discriminated against, etc., were much better prepared for those things to happen online. They were prepared. So I guess that's my pitch for the value of lived experience in a community manager.
One of my items on the wish list actually ties into that, which is that the anecdote behind it is at some point my partner and I, we run double exposure together, and we realized that we had our roles reversed, where he was working the front of the house. He's a white dude who's currently in his 50s. He was in his 40s at the time, privileged as shit, and was being the face of the organization. He was the person out in the front of the house. He was the person interacting with people as they came into the building. And in the middle of a Metatopia, he turns to me and he says, "Oh, this has to change." And I was like, "What are we talking about?" And he goes, I need to be doing the logistics in the background. I need to be the skeleton. I need to be the infrastructure and the order muppet. And I need your ass out front because I'm the wrong person to be up here. This is a wall of white, and this is a problem because I'm the one up here. You're going to be better at bringing in the people that we need to be here. And so we, in the middle of a convention, swapped our roles. And he had my back at every single turn. When I came to him, I'm like, "This is weird and hard, and I'm covered in people's mascara, and this, like, people are crying on me. Why am I covered in snot?" And he was like, "I will hug you after you go change, but you're doing good work." And that is, you have to, one, if the wrong skill sets are in the wrong places, freaking move it. Two, if you look up and realize that the most privileged person in your organization is your community manager, you've got it backward.
Yep.
So those are my wish lists, is that people would be aware of the fact that those things really matter when you decide who is shaping your outward face. Bebo, actually, the thing that you said in public that really, I was just like, yes, that is, pay them appropriately, pay them what they are worth. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Oh, definitely. I would say that probably one of my biggest complaints in working in community management and social media management in general is that it is viewed as an entry level or low level job because everybody just uses social media. And I get that you think that you using social media is the same as being a social media or a community manager, but it's dramatically different. Like when I get up each morning to plan my day, I have every single hour of 8 hours of work planned out from beginning to end, and I have tasks I need to check off of that list. That's not how people just use social media. And if I could get one thing for people to understand, it's that social media management is not an entry level job, and neither is community management. You have to have deep understanding of interpersonal connections. You have to be able to anticipate other people's feelings, emotions. You have to be a highly empathetic person who can understand and put yourself in that other person's shoes. Some of these traits can't even be taught. You either have them or you don't. So cherish your social media manager, especially if they're effective, because at the end of the day, your community is attached to your community manager. And if you lose them and you have not found a way to continue on with your brand maintaining that same level of quality, your community will turn on you. Like, just gonna say it. Like, you have to be careful about who you pick. And more importantly, make sure that you've got a plan for when they're not going to be there anymore. Always make sure that you are documenting your marketing and branding processes, because not having a plan in place when they leave is really difficult.
Yep. Kelsey, do you have anything to add to that other than a hearty hell yeah?
I mean, the hearty hell yes is for real. I will say that, yeah, I think part of it is that community management does not have a lot of data analytics attached to it. Like, you can't see, like, there's no numbers there. And so if you're a larger company, a lot of times you're looking at numbers to see your success rate. And the success rate of community managers is entirely done by your public perception and who wants to be involved and who feels safe being involved and who feels included and who does not feel included and does not feel welcome, because that's just as vital. So I think that I think that the best thing that could happen for us is to really build up what a successful community manager looks like. So when other companies are looking at, like, okay, do we need a community manager? Like, what does this do? Because I feel like a lot of companies just go, like, we need one because everybody else has one. I'm like, you might not need one, frankly. So, like, having a good understanding of, like, what is a community manager? How is it different from a social media manager? How can you determine the success of this individual? What are parameters that you can apply to their work? Like, those are the things that we need to look at across the board to see success in community management. Goals, yeah.
Absolutely.
I want to
Go ahead.
throw in a pitch for the importance of documentation for institution knowledge, for keeping records of good things and bad things and the responses to them. I know that's certainly been lacking for a long time in the community moderation space. People often start a community with no idea of what they're going to run into, or that they should have a code of conduct beyond the one that I see most often on Twitch, which is the one and only rule is don't be a dick, which is like, I mean, better than nothing, I guess. But there's like, yeah, so people don't go in prepared for what they're going to face. So documentation, training, teaching, all hugely important.
I'm just going to chime in that our code of conduct for a number of so up until about 12 years ago was don't piss Abby off. You really don't want to have to deal with Abby if you cross a line. That is not a good code of conduct. It is accurate, but it's not a good code of conduct. You were going to say something, Kelsey.
I think what's interesting is like there's no real degree for community management. So a lot of our learning is just by finding somebody else who's a community manager and learning from them. So the actually getting literature out there of like what is a good community manager? Like even if you look and you Google like what does a community manager do? It's like 70 different things for 70 different companies and makes no sense at all.
Half of which is actually social media management.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. Yep. So I think part of it is like getting our institutional knowledge in one place and writing it down like that is going to be really important because you can't just go to like Chris McGee University of Washington, which is a real university I just made up, and get a community management degree and expect that it's going to work for you.
So much of the community management that I do is like listening and having been in the trenches and having people cry on me and having situations blow up or having my phone ring at 3 a.m. and be like, I am in this community across the country and I need to talk to you about this thing that has gone terribly awry. And I'm like, I mean, I can listen, but I have no, okay, cool. What you need is a peer to hear this out. And the find other people is the only like resource that we have. Find somebody else and be like, holy crap, we're dealing with this thing. Or how did you structure this so that it was successful? What did you do that was different from every other community I've seen that has blown up because of X or Y? So yeah, the lack of resources is a huge barrier for building systems for community managers.
Yeah. I mean, part of it is very much like you will not know how to deal with a crisis until it directly happens to you. Like I before I worked for Gen Con, I joked that like I've done everything. I have managed every possible scenario. I have dealt with I have dealt with a literal murder case in my community before. I have dealt with literally everything. And then the pandemic happened and I was like, cool, this is new. So like
Yep.
you are constantly learning.
So we had a question from the audience, which was, what is your favorite part of community management?
I don't know if you want to start, Bebo. If you don't.
Yeah, I'll start.
Okay.
My favorite part of community management is connecting people with each other, which probably sounds silly, but I have like 2 friends who are currently going through divorce. And one of them was like, I just wish I had somebody to talk to about this that has been through this. And my other friend said the same thing to me 3 weeks ago. And I was like, all right, let's do this. And you can do the same thing in any community. Find any reason to make those connections and just be mindful and pay attention to those things. And you can find the smallest things that will end up, I don't know, like I'm personally responsible for multiple of my friends' children being born because I introduced them to their partner. So I'm like, hey, listen, if anything happens to you, I've got to pay for your kids' college. It's just like in my heart, I'm partially responsible for them. Like,
Excellent. Kelsey?
So the whole reason I got into this work is because when I started being involved in nerd communities, I didn't see anybody like me. And I didn't see anybody who came from my background at the time because I started doing this like really nerd heavy stuff in the late 90s. Queer representation was kind of like a myth. And so I really wanted to make sure that I was making a place where other people could see themselves, and making spaces where people could see, um, you know, people like each other. So that's probably my favorite part is like the past year, especially at Gen Con, seeing so much more vibrant queer spaces has been like a delight to my tiny queer heart. And it's probably still like my favorite thing anytime I work is seeing more queer people excited to be at Gen Con.
Well, and So I run the first exposure playtest hall at Gen Con. So we are in a spot facing out, and we're by the will call line. So
Oh
we
yeah, we're right
probably
there.
see 50% of the convention, and the vast increase in the last 5 years of queer representation at Gen Con. We have noticed and talked about it amongst ourselves and been like, hey, is there a sea change happening? Because this is lovely. So props.
Thank you. Yeah, it's especially this past year, like, because we took a year off, and that's when I did a lot of like building and community growth. So being able to come to Gen Con, especially now that we were doing like pronoun ribbons and stuff like that, and seeing visibly people being comfortable being themselves in our space was just like exactly what I want to happen in my world. So it's proof that like if you put the work in, something can actually happen, which is cool.
That's excellent. Joseph, you've talked to a lot of community managers. Can you just talk about some of the things that you've been excited to hear them talk about?
Well, I guess I would mostly just be echoing what Kelsey and Bebo have already said, but just the most inspiring and powerful things I've heard have been like, for example, uh, a moderator saying to me, I created this Discord server so trans kids could have a place to go where they feel safe and understood. And similarly, from a couple of Twitch streamers, I started streaming because I wanted to create a home for people like me. And I think there's a piece of that in community management across a lot of spaces. It's from what I've heard a very personal experience that people can put a lot of their self into. So I guess it's a fundamentally, very fundamentally human job at its core.
Awesome. Again, that triggers me to think about a thing that I always am curious to ask or talk to other community managers about, which is that at Living Games 2016, I met Stephen Daschle, who is a scholar at University of Maryland, who framed a thing for me that happens in nerd spaces in a way that I could finally wrap my head around a dynamic that we are constantly fighting against, which is Prop Tart Minnesota said, thank you for your answers, by the way. Where when you get marginalized people into a space, whether they are circumstantially marginalized because they were nerds who were awkward but actually had a lot of systemic privilege, or are systemically marginalized because they're people of color, because they're queer, because they stand at complicated intersections, the tendency in spaces that are very privileged is to replicate power dynamics that you see in the outside world and to bring toxic power dynamics in. So the big fish in a small pond metaphor. I would love it, and this may be bigger, and this may be a thing that we talk about in a follow-up conversation next year, but we're very smart, mindful, conscious people who are aware of the intersections that we interact with. What are your tools for dissuading people from creating those power dynamics where they are trying to be the top dog? How do you incentivize? And this is why community managers are so fucking important, is because we talk about shit like this and think about shit like this. But do you have a tool that has been successful in your community for incentivizing not that power dynamic and not the montage at the end where you get the girl and the job and the cash?
Yeah. So one thing that I heard very kind of recently that kind of changed my perception on reality was there was this TikTok I watched, which I'm sure everybody can relate to this these days, where somebody said people's idea of what reality is like a mesh, right? Imagine like a net and all of these intersections crossing between each other. Now, if somebody says something that doesn't fit in somebody's reality, like somebody's perception of what the world is, it just won't go through the net. And so rather than going through the net because it just doesn't fit and it doesn't make sense, it's just going to fall on the floor, and that person's not going to retain that information. When I finally understood that, I realized that I had to make sure that every person I was interacting with understood, like, at least on a core level, what I was talking about. And so I had to learn how to ask the right questions. And a huge part of that is just kind of paying attention to people and making sure that I'm asking the right questions ahead of time before I try to feed them some information that they might not understand. When making board game videos, I had to spoon feed them the information one piece at a time, and I kind of have to lay that out before I try to, do really community management and diffuse a situation if there's a situation to be diffused, for example.
Yep, to 100% agree. I think that active listening is like a huge proponent of what we have to do to make sure people understand. The other thing that like I do a lot is I do not believe in community management or moderating from on high. Like the person who comes in and swoops down is like, now you have committed a sin and you go. Like that's not effective, and it also creates those power dynamics. Instead, integrating yourself as a member of the community as well, being a human being and being a person, makes it more likely for those power dynamics to not replicate because you are not having them yourself in your structures either. And I will also say a lot of it does fall back into communities create themselves in your image. So if you're in there and you're being a human being and acting like a human being and treating people with respect when there are problems that happen or new people show up, those new people will either kind of fall into that as well because they see everyone else doing it and they want to feel included and they want to be a part of that community, or they won't and they'll leave because they do not feel like they want to be there and they can't get the thing that they want out of it, and that's okay. Having people leave because they don't want to fit into the scheme of how you want to run things is a-okay depending on what it is.
I leave
Go ahead, Bebo.
communities all the time because they're just not for me. It's not their fault. Like, I just don't want to talk about Animal Crossing that much. I enjoy playing Animal Crossing. I just don't want to talk about it 24 hours a day, right?
24 hours a day, that's fine. A little bit of Animal Crossing talk, I'm down.
I just want to
Can I ask
chill.
a question? Is that allowed?
Yeah. No, I'm not gonna let. No. Yes, of course.
In my interviews, I've talked with a lot of community managers who are in communities that are running communities, managing communities that are incredibly meaningful to them, and they've kind of let the community become their life. And they're on 24 hours a day. They're responding to people, working on things, and they burn out. So I'm wondering if any of you have strategies for finding balance, even when there's this pull to just to make it your life.
This is so what you've said there is the reason why I don't run LARPs for a living anymore, because I did it so hard for 6 years, just managing 24/7 that I burned myself out so utterly and completely that I had to take 2 years off and I just worked freelance for 2 years. I went back to working retail because I was just like, I don't want a job where I think human thoughts for a while. That's how badly I burned myself out. And when I started doing community management work again, I was really worried about that happening again. And so I had to put in place like very specific rules about like when I work, when I do not work, and create boundaries for myself. So I have hours and I work hours. And if there's an emergency outside of hours, cool. There's an emergency outside of hours and I will deal with it. But beyond that, like I don't touch community management. I have hired contractors to help manage things while I am away or in hours where I know I'm not going to be around. I'm very fortunate that during the actual Gen Con proper, I have a moderation team who are amazing and communicative and know how to do their jobs. And if they need to pull me in for something, then they'll tag me and bring me in. For the most part, know what's the hierarchy between emergency and not emergency, so like Kelsey can chill. And the other thing is like I have a very, very fine boundary between my public presence on social media and my private presence. I have 5 different Twitter accounts that are all just like some people. I don't think I have any one person on all of my Twitter accounts. because like you need to have those boundaries so you can have your own space to be a human being, so you don't have to be on 24/7. And that is a huge lesson that I had to learn, because if you've ever dealt with like LARP people, and I say this as being a LARP person and a LARPer from the bottom of my heart, LARP is a lifestyle for many human beings. And so there was a period of time where I would go to a party with my friends, and then like the party would just, they'd unintentionally be talking about my work. And so I could not go anywhere relaxed, because like that was their whole work. So even in my friend circles, there are times where I'm like, we're not talking about games right now. We're gonna talk about something else. And so they'll create like boundaries for me too, to just relax so I don't have to think about work.
Bebo?
Yeah, I've definitely set a lot of boundaries with my new job. I will say that like a couple months ago I burned out so hard I ended up hospitalized. Uh it was really bad, and I ended up having to take 6 weeks off of work entirely. Like just like literally laid up in bed like healing. I had a super bad ulcer. I was really really sick. I was literally 85 pounds, like so unbelievably healthy. Like, and I will say that like a couple things that I did to help set boundaries is making sure that I have a space that's separate from where I sleep and where I work, even if that space is modular. So I have my bed, but I also have my computer desk space. And so I have a monitor on an arm that I swap between the two. So I can still watch TV in bed. But when I swap the monitor over here, I am working when I am here. And I do not play video games here. I work here. And I'm very clear about those boundaries. I also have a Discord channel that I spend a majority of my like fun time with that is not run by me. That is incredibly important. It's a big distinction because in a lot of spaces I'm expected to lead because I don't know why. I don't like it.
It's the curse of competency.
Yeah. Seriously. Yeah, and so, I've got like 5 friends who all live in Texas that are a bunch of like tech bros, and they have this Discord channel where it's them and their college buddies that all went to UT together. Like I have no connections to the rest of my life in this group, but we play video games together every week. And it allows me this separation from like these are my friends and this is my like board game fun old life that I desperately needed. If I did not get that separation, it would have been incredibly difficult.
Yep. I put my phone on do not disturb at 11:15 every night, and it takes a lot for me to put it back on. I will announce that I'm going off social media. I will see a storm brewing and be like, no. Like if it is adjacent to my community but does not directly affect us, and people are going to have big feelings about it that are not my problem, I will just nope out of social media for the day and be like, I can't actually see you. I mean, I'm peeking in and you're a trash fire, but I can't see you, so you can't see me. And the other thing is I do weird shit like take sewing classes, because I can't be stressed out about the shit that's happening in the community when some 65-year-old woman who has sewn all of her own clothes for the last 50 years is showing me how not to run my finger over with a sewing machine.
Hey, just we're at the 10-minute mark, folks.
Cool. Kelsey, you look like maybe you had something else to add.
No, I was just very
Okay.
empathetically agreeing with you, because like my thing that I picked up when things were really bad at work was I started making my own candles.
That's awesome.
Yeah, now I just make my own candles when I'm trying not to look at my computer. But I will agree with Bebo that like I have a separate laptop that I just use for work. Like I'm currently on my work setup right now. And the minute work is done, like this all goes like away and I go into an entirely different computer. That is where all the fun stuff is. It's also good because I'm very, very ADHD and easily distracted. So I have to make sure I focus myself as much as possible. And that also prevents that piece for me.
Mm-hmm. I was going to add one more piece of info, which was just that a huge part of setting those boundaries is also knowing when your work is being valued and when it's not. And if you are struggling to get by, if you are not able to make ends meet and your employer is unwilling to give you a raise, leave.
Mhm.
Leave way before it becomes a problem. Like, if they are not understanding and empathetic and, like, setting the tone to actually take care of you as a member of their staff, but they're expecting you to treat them like family, you need to get out of there. And
And
also, you
in
need
many
to
cases, that means leaving games, and that's okay.
Oh, yeah, I left board games, per se, technically, for tech, but I went from making, like, $35,000 a year to over 6 figures overnight. Like, I can't stress enough that, like, if you have the skills and you have the experience and you're not happy, leave.
Yep.
Find your
Absolutely.
happiness, because if you're miserable where you're at, you're not gonna find it. Go somewhere else.
And your misery is going to bleed over into the communities that you are supporting. If you are miserable and you're not being supported, and you're being expected to be the brand manager and the social media manager and the heart and soul and the face of a company, and you are miserable and being beaten down, it is going to bleed over and you're going to have unintended impact on the community that you want to support. And it is heartbreaking but true that companies that do not support their community managers are doing active harm to the communities that they employ those people to support.
And it's something we don't talk about either.
Not at all. Not at all. I mean, when you're empowering someone to be like the face of an entire company, if you're not taking care of that face, like it is tremendously visible.
I had early in the pandemic, I had, no, this was when I first went full-time Envoy. And so suddenly self-employed, suddenly traveling all over the country, talking to community managers across the country. I had a day where it was a March, where it was the week of Me Too, where I had 4 or 5 different communities call me in the space of a week and say, we need to talk to you about how we manage this Me Too issue that has come up. And I would get off the phone and I would crawl into bed and I'd pull the blanket back over my head and I'd sneak my old lady cat under the blanket with me and I would just hide. And at some point I was like, I'm neglecting everything else I should be doing. And my partner turned to me and said, no, you're really not. None of that is vital. You take care of you, because I heard the tail end of that phone call. Without that support, right? If your community manager has just dealt with something where there's been violence within the community, or they've soaked in emotional damage, or they've helped support somebody through coming forth with an assault report, right? Fucking protect them, hand them a goddamn sandwich, and put them in bed. That's my soapbox.
It's a good soapbox. I like that soapbox. I'm all for the post trauma sandwich soapbox. Sounds great.
I wish somebody had done that for me. Like, there was a 6-week period during the pandemic in which, like, there was an active shooting from one of my community members who killed themselves. There was, a huge amount of Me Too things going on, and I was just like an emotional train wreck. And at no point did anybody at my company say, like, do you need to take the day off and have a break? And it's just like, because they said we have things to do, but honestly, if you're not building in some kind of buffer for your employees to have a day if they have to take it, you're failing them before they've even started their job.
Correct.
Absolutely. And if a company does not understand what a community manager is dealing with when there is an active shooter threat, when a community is going through a crisis, when someone has a house fire, like the amount of empathy necessary. If you run a company and you cannot look at your community manager and say, holy crap, go take the day off, put another layer in there, get somebody else to make that decision, or give the community manager the empowerment to say, I'm out today.
5 minutes, folks.
Does anybody have anything here at the end that you want to add? Anything that you really want to end with for the audience?
I don't think so. I think we did a pretty good job of covering the variety of bases that you need to think about when you're hiring a community manager.
Community
And to keep your
managers,
community manager.
if you're not making at least 50 grand a year, please ask for a raise at minimum. I don't care where you live. I don't care. Like, if you live somewhere more expensive, you should be making more. Like, but at a minimum, don't let anybody pay you less than 50 grand a year.
Yeah,
Please.
I agree with that. I fully agree with that.
And if your health plan does not include therapy, fucking quit.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so quickly, where do we find each of you online in your public personas?
Who do you want to start with?
Bebo.
Yeah. So I don't really have a public persona anymore.
For you.
I'm
Good
Bebo.
boundaries. Hooray.
I quit my public persona. You can find me on the internet as Beebold Games, but I don't really make videos or write anymore. But you can go check out my old stuff or read my book.
Buy Bebo's book.
Yeah.
Kelsey?
You can find me on Twitter at mx_danger. You can find me here on Twitch at mx_magpie, or you can go to mxmagpie.com. I stream a lot of games during the week. I'm currently obsessed with playing stupid Pokemon games because they make me happy. But as soon as the Animal Crossing update comes out, I will be deep diving into that, I am sure. And then on Twitch, I just talk about dumb video games. And I just came back from Disney, so if you like Disney, you can look at all my Disney photos and me just freaking out and crying in space for like 3 days.
Amazing.
So good.
Joseph?
Probably easiest on Twitter at Joseph Seering, just my name. I tweet about moderation a lot.
Awesome. And I'm at Avonelle on Twitter. I'm terrible at separating our corporate brand and community management from me. And so everything that matters is under my account, even though that's terrible practices. Shame, shame. All right. Thank you, audience members. I appreciate all of you for showing up and listening in. And for our panelists, I really appreciate that you took an hour and a half out of your day to come have this conversation with me because I ended up on a soapbox. Thank you.
Happy to, anytime.
Yes. Thank you for inviting me.
Yes, thank you. This was fun.